Christian life is safe. I think the misconception of Christianity in our age is that it is a call to a safe, mundane existence. Some think that faith in Jesus is a safe path in order to build a neat life for yourself. And that is why when I will talk about something like we got to engage the culture with righteousness, you're like, but counterpoint, that may interrupt my safe life. Yes, it must, because it may be that the Lord will work for us. If we do the right thing, if we do it the right way. Jonathan looks at his armor bearer as if to say, come on, man. God might do something. Now, I'll be honest, that doesn't fill me with the most confidence. But bravery is not fearlessness. Bravery is what happens when someone moves forward in the face of fear. When someone keeps going, even though they are afraid. That is what bravery really is. That is what courage really is. Faith is never a guarantee about right here and right now. Rather, faith is trust in the one who can move. And the confidence that even if he doesn't, God still has you in his hand. Some of you are paralyzed because you don't have a guarantee about the immediate. Friends, I'll be honest with you. God calls you to move in the immediate because regardless of how the immediate works out, he has guaranteed eternity. I will tell you, Hebrews 11:33 through 34 is powerful. Speaking of those who lived great, faithful lives, he says, through faith, these men conquered kingdoms, enforced justice, obtained promises, stopped the mouths of lions. That's a bucket list item, right? Quenched the power of fire, escaped the edge of the sword, were made strong out of weakness, became mighty in war, put foreign armies to flight. Yes, that's what we want. We don't want verses 36 through 38, though. Look at what he says here. Others suffered mocking and flogging, even chains and imprisonment. They were stoned. They were sawn in two. They were killed with the sword. They went about in skins of sheep and goats, destitute, afflicted, mistreated, of whom the world was not worthy. Wandering about in deserts and mountains and in dens and caves of the earth. God has two paths for his children. The path we're all about, the miraculous. Putting foreign armies to flight, walking through the Red Sea, not getting wet. Standing in the fire like Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, and they see the fourth man, Jesus Christ, standing there, and I'm not even getting burned. And we say, yes, Lord. But when we keep reading, we see God has another path. There were people who were brutally murdered for their faith. Read Fox's Book of Martyrs. Christians have a history of being lit on fire, literally, for their faith in Jesus Christ and dying. Sawn in two. I don't want to do that. Stoned. Destitute. Poor. Poverty-stricken. Because Christians couldn't make a living in certain eras. So they had to live in caves in the first century. And we are tempted to look at that situation and say, well, then they didn't have the faith of a giant, because the faith of a giant means that you get the reward in the immediate. Never lose sight of what verse 38 says about those who suffer and die for the sake of the gospel, those who live lives suffering. It says, of whom the world was not worthy. In other words, The unbelievable faith that it took to stand in the face of danger and die is the greatest faith you could ever know in this life, because the call to follow Christ is a call to the cross of Christ. Do not ever measure your faith by your leisure or opulence, because we have a history of whom the world was not worthy, and it was based on oppression, suffering, and martyrdom. Jesus warns us about this really in Matthew 10:16. He says, "Behold, I'm sending you out as sheep in the midst of wolves, so be wise as serpents, innocent as doves." In other words, the life of a Christian is a dangerous life, so you can't be an idiot. You got to be able to walk and chew gum at the same time. You got to be able to face danger purely and righteously, and you also got to be able to strategize and say, is there a way out of this one? Wise as serpents and innocent as doves, because the road of faith is a risky one that requires strategy and it requires thought. But one of my favorite things about what Jonathan does is because to me, it doesn't look like he uses great strategy. If you look at the context, he immediately puts himself at a disadvantage. The text says he's crawling down rocky crags and he's crawling up rocky crags. Then, when they find some Philistines to fight, he sees some. What you would normally say from a military standpoint is, all right, let's wait until the cover of night. Let's sneak in there. SEAL Team 6. Jonathan says, hey, let's go make sure they see us. Keep reading. Jonathan said, behold, we will cross over, verse 8, to the men, and we will show ourselves to them. Armor bearers should have been like, hold up. Wait a minute. That's not good strategy. If they say to us, wait until we come to you, then we will stand still in our place, and we will not go up to them. But if they say, come up to us, then we will go up, for the Lord has given them into our hand, and this shall be a sign for us. So both of them showed themselves to the garrison of the Philistines, and the Philistines said, look, Hebrews are coming out of the holes where they have hidden themselves. And the men of the garrison hailed Jonathan and his armor bearer and said, come up to us, and we will show you a thing. It's like, hey, we're nice. And Jonathan said to his armor bearer, come up after me, for the Lord has given them into the hand of Israel. Then Jonathan climbed up on his hands and his feet. I don't know if he had other options. And his armor bearer after him. And they fell before Jonathan and his armor bearer, killed them after him. Everything is against these guys. Everything is working to their detriment. Yet Jonathan has no retreat in him. He says, if they call us up, it's a sign from God. We're going to win. But note what he said before that. He said, if they say, hey, stay there, we're coming down, which would have put them at a disadvantage, because then they've got to crawl, and you can't hold a sword or a shield while you're crawling. Jonathan says, we're just going to stand here, and we're going to wait till they come, because they're going to kill us. I can't wrap my mind around why he wouldn't run. But they say, come on up to us. And then the text says, as I made fun of, they crawled with their hands and feet. The Bible doesn't point anything out by accident. The reason that the Bible points that out is because while they were crawling, they were the most vulnerable. Because they couldn't run, they couldn't hold a sword, they couldn't hold a shield, they couldn't hold a bow, they couldn't hold an arrow, they couldn't hold a spear, they couldn't hold anything, and they were completely vulnerable to the Philistines at that point. Jonathan's only plan was faith that God had a purpose for his life. And if he lived or died, he wanted to experience God's purpose, even if it was the last thing that he was going to experience. And I will tell you, friends, some of you will live, then you will die, and you will never see God's purpose for your life because you've taken zero risks for him. I am and always have been convinced that since I am a follower of Jesus, that something follows that. I believe it is my responsibility to find what it is that sets me apart from unbelievers. What is it that God saved me to accomplish on this earth that can only be accomplished because of my faith in Jesus Christ? I want to see God move like Jonathan wanted to see God move. And I will tell you, in a culture increasingly hostile to Christians, what you are doing must set you apart from unbelievers. I mean, friends, I'll be honest, in our society, the smallest obedience to Scripture is countercultural. Raising a family, fidelity to your hetero spouse, forming a nuclear family, being present to disciple your children. I don't know if you know this or not, but in the last 5 years, everything I just mentioned has been called an act of hate to our culture. When the Scripture just says, it's what God's people do. So I ask you, what about you is a step in your life stating, it may be that the Lord will work for us? It may be. What about you is looking at life and saying, who do I need to share the gospel with more and more? Because it may be that the Lord will work for us. Who do you need to disciple? Because it may be that the Lord will work for us. What do you need to risk? What do you need to do as a parent? Because it may be. What about your education? What about your marriage? What about your career? What about your finances? And on and on and on. What is it in my life that I need to look at and say, it may be that the Lord will work for me? I am tired of safety because one thing is certain. When I read the pages of Scripture, I don't see mighty moves of the Spirit of God happen from positions of safety. I see it when someone has the audacity to risk the status quo. We're increasingly told that we must be passive as Christians, that we must just be the nicest nice about all the niceties that anyone can ever nice. And we should never say an offensive thing to anyone. Because if at the end of the day, they look at us and they say, you're just so stinking nice. Revival. How's that working out for you? History shows us that God works in movements for a moment and then not for a while. My question is, why not now and why not through us? From the early church to the Reformation to the Great Awakening to Billy Sunday to Billy Graham to fundamentalism to the moral majority, every one of those situations involved people ceasing to be satisfied with what the world was appeasing them with and what the world was telling them. What if we ceased to be satisfied with what the world has to offer us and we were a little risky for the sake of the gospel? It may be that the Lord will work for us. And then number 3 this morning, quickly, faith aligns your mind with God's commitments. Faith aligns your mind with God's commitments. I get asked, okay, well, what should I do then? I'm going to read a text. It's not going to make any sense to you, and then I'm going to try to explain it. Skip down to verse 24. The Philistines died. Saul woke up. His son was gone. He panics. Where's my son? My son's dead, which is a natural response in a wartime situation. And so he looks at the men of Israel. Verse 24 says, the men of Israel had been hard-pressed that day, so Saul had laid an oath on the people, saying, cursed be the man who eats food until it is evening, and I am avenged on my enemies. So none of the people had tasted food. Now when all the people came to the forest, behold, there was honey on the ground. And when the people entered the forest, behold, the honey was dropping, but no one put his hand to his mouth, for the people feared the oath. But Jonathan had not heard his father charge the people with the oath. So he put out the tip of his staff that was on his hand, or in his hand, and dipped it in the honeycomb, put it to his mouth, and his eyes became bright. Then one of the people said, your father strictly charged the people with an oath, saying, cursed be the man who eats food this day. And the people were faint. Then Jonathan said, my father has troubled the land. See how my eyes have become bright because I tasted a little of this honey? How much better if the people had eaten freely today of the spoil of their enemies that they found. For now the defeat among the Philistines has not been great. Faith aligns your mind with God's commitments. I'm always amazed. When I was young, to today, I've always hated what I thought were stupid rules. And yeah, I anointed myself the arbiter of what a stupid rule is. It was from a very young age. If you ask my parents, they will tell you I had a little problem with authority growing up. It may have extended into adulthood. One of my favorite questions I've always asked is why? Why does this rule exist? Why does it have to be this way? I would sometimes say, why are you in charge? They didn't appreciate that. Especially when I was like 12, all right? They didn't receive it well. The latter half of this book shows the aftermath of Jonathan's moment of faith. He returns to the camp. Nobody's eating. He eats. He feels better. He's energized. And Jonathan basically looks at the people when they're like, your dad said we can't do that. And he's like, well, my dad's an idiot. I mean, it's the Steve International version, but I tell you, you go back to the original language, it's basically what happens. Is my dad made a stupid rule. I'm not going to obey it. Saul had turned into Dolores Umbridge from Harry Potter. And nobody likes that. You invent rules that don't exist when you have no faith to move forward with what matters. The fact of the matter is, Jonathan's mind was in tune with God's mind, and he had outgrown his father's vanity. Elmer Towns used to tell students, when God has been silent, I probably should be too. And legalistic people make up rules that don't matter because they've got to do something while they're sitting around. Obedience frees you to a wide open field of possibility and potential for what you can accomplish for God and His gospel. Stop being afraid of doing the wrong good thing. Jonathan could enjoy the honey because he was living by faith and could enjoy the benefits rather than fearing the unknowns. Throughout Scripture, there are times when people make stupid vows, and we should be willing to call them that. If God didn't command it, they shouldn't have vowed it, and it wasn't binding. Some of you are committed to really stupid things that you think makes you a good person. Those commitments, are actually keeping you from the life that God intends you to live by faith. And you use those dumb commitments as an excuse. And you may say, well, I can't break my commitment. Why can't you? Who says? Yes, you can. And yes, you must. Even if it is not necessarily a sinful thing, if it is standing in the way of discipleship, if it is standing in the way of obedience to Scripture and what has been clear on, it is, and you need to cut it off and then walk by faith. I get so tired of people telling me, well, I can't commit to that environment of discipleship. I have a commitment. No, you have an excuse. And it's sinful. So here's the deal. It's very simple. Trust Jesus, obey His word, walk by faith, move forward for the gospel, and you will live a life that matters. And so what specifically should you do right now? You should stop making excuses. Stop acting like the decisions are so hard. Some of you are in your 30s, 40s, 50s, 60s, 70s, 300s. and you are still waiting for God to tell you what to do. What are you waiting for? He already has. And he's not going to say anything else until you stop making excuses and climb those rocks and face some Philistines. What should you do? The next best thing that comes your way that makes much of Jesus and makes many disciples. That's what you should do. Whatever is going to be the best opportunity to leave the biggest legacy of faith for the next generation while making as many disciples as you can in the immediate is what you should do every single day of your life. So get moving. A few application points. First, do things to show your faith in Jesus. Will it show your faith in Jesus? Do it. Move forward until God says stop. Most of the time, he says stop when you die. Thirdly, engage the hostile culture with the truth of God. This is going to become more pertinent in the days to come. You are going to have to say some controversial things to faithfully follow Jesus in the coming days. If you need permission, I give it to you. Stop holding back, because it's not winsomeness. I don't believe it's even strategy. Don't take this the wrong way. It's cowardice. I free you from your cowardice this morning. Break commitments that don't make much of Jesus. And admit that. I've been doing this thing for 20 years. It's keeping me from discipleship. I'm done. It's not always a time commitment or a physical commitment. Sometimes it's an emotional commitment. Sometimes it's a mental commitment. Sometimes some of you are afraid you might get hurt, so you hold back. Break it. And then finally, stop wasting your life. You know you are. Let today be the day that changes. Every Sunday we reflect on what's called the Lord's Supper. The price that Jesus Christ paid for my sin and for your sin. When you eat and when you drink, you actually see God's commitment to your salvation, God's commitment to your discipleship, the price that he paid for you. And therefore, if you're not a follower of Jesus, to eat and drink would be a lie. It's not your meal right now. But if you will turn from your sin, if you will trust the finished work of Jesus Christ, it's your meal. Today can be the day of redemption. Turn from your sin. Trust the finished work of Jesus. But if you are a Christian, eat, drink, proclaim your faith.
I'm calling on the God of Jacob, whose love endures through generations. I know that you will keep your covenant. I'm calling on the God of Moses, the one who opened up the oceans. I need you now to do the same thing for me. Oh God, my God, I need you. Oh God, my God, I need you now. How I need you now. Yeah. Oh rock of ages, I'm standing on your faithfulness, on your faithfulness. I'm calling on the God of Mary, whose favor rests upon the lowly. I know with you all things are possible. I'm calling on the God of David, who made a shepherd boy courageous. I may not face Goliath, but I've got my own child.